fall harvest. I had just got into yet another argument with my dad. It was the same old jazz. You never do this. You never do that. You're my son and you're nothing like me. Yada yada yada. I decided to take a walk. Cool my head and whatnot. It was raining heavily this night. Perfect. I wasn't going to, but if I had started crying, no one would have been able to notice. I've been out of college for a few years, and I still live at home with my parents. It's not that I wanted to, but there were just too many options for me out there in the world. I wasn't particularly good at anything, and I really didn't want to pursue a career in which I received my diploma. So, for my lack of direction, I'd been harassed by both my parents. The rain quickly plastered my afro, which wasn't hard to do since my hair is soft as wool, and not particularly coarse. I'm part Indian, so even though I looked black, my hair is softer than most. I hadn't bothered with an umbrella, so then I had to bow my head to let the water cascade off my brow and nose. Just as well. Hands in my jean pockets, my breath clouded the air as I kept walking along the street. It was only about 8 o'clock, so most of the stores in the shopping center near my house were still open, if only for a little while longer. Maple leaves would drift about every now and then, adding to the pumpkin decor. The buildings were in a colonial motif, with small trees here and there along the brick promenade. This Friday night was still plenty young, so there was a sizable crowd around the theater. The production of Sweeney Todd was being performed in the spirit of the harvest holiday. The people were huddled under the awning, talking in good cheer. The driving rain and the voices of the crowd did a good job covering most of the sounds. I could barely hear myself think. As I passed an alleyway by the theater, I saw a couple necking. It wasn't a shock to me. These things happened. I passed by another alleyway and thought I spotted another couple, but it didn't sound like they were kissing. Over the din, I could hear wet, tearing noises. Gurgling. I'm not sure what I was thinking, but as I came to a morbid conclusion, my feet stopped moving. My legs were frozen. I hadn't cleared the gap between the buildings yet. As I stood, unable to take my gaze away from what looked to be a tall, gaunt man eating his way toward the woman's heart via her neck, I was well aware that he would soon notice me, and I was stuck. The sound of the woman's clothing ripping, her gurgling scream, the gnashing of the man's teeth, all were drowned out by the downpour. I started to scream, to make a move for the knife I kept in my pocket, to make a run for it, or attempt to save the woman if it wasn't too late already. Nothing. I was crippled with fear. As that monster bore the woman to the ground, he began to laugh. It was like leaves scraping along the ground as they settled. Revulsion began to fill me as I continued to watch the carnal sight before me. He smeared her entrails and gore over his face in ecstasy. I could see his eyes then, like silver fire dancing against the black silhouette of his misshapen head. It was then that he saw me. He stood up. I hadn't realized how tall he truly was. Hadn't really appreciated how tall he was until he appeared right in front of me. Not a short person, but this man was nearly 8 feet tall. Something finally snapped in me, breaking my spell of immobility. I ran. I ran so fast, I felt like I was flying down the promenade. I didn't know where I was running to, but I knew it was well away from that thing. A flicker in the corner of my eye drew my attention. He appeared just in front of me. His breath smelled like meat, bile, and excrement. His shark teeth were ghastly. Before I could pull my blade, he snatched me up and chopped my neck. Everything went black. When I awoke, I noticed 2 things. First, I wasn't being rained on anymore. Second, I was shackled to a table. There was a sharp pain in my neck from the blow. I looked about. I was in a dim room. The walls appeared wooden. There were no windows. Lit candles sat in the 4 corners of the table I was on. I felt clammy and almost feverish. I screamed for help. I got the distinct feeling that no one could hear me. It felt like hours went by. My restraints held me fast, and I stopped resisting once they started cutting into my skin. A door behind me cracked open. I heard scuffling steps as someone heavy made their way toward me. The door behind me creaked open. I heard scuffling steps as someone heavy made their way toward me. "Who's there?" I demanded.
Awake, are we? You're quite resilient. Well, more so than others.
The voice finally moved into my field of vision. It was a man from the alley. His eyes weren't silver fire anymore, but they were clouded over in cataracts. I could still feel his sight on me, despite his apparent blindness. Who are you?" I asked.
I suppose we have time for chit-chat. I go by many names, the most infamous of which is Jack the Ripper.
"I don't believe you. That man was executed more than a century ago. Even if the one they killed in his place wasn't the real culprit, there's no way you could be alive to be him."
Why do you say that, Is it because there's no such thing as magic? My dear boy, magic is quite the real. As am I.
To punctuate his point, he scraped a sharp nail across my cheek, drawing blood. I looked him in the eyes with disdain. I wasn't about to show him any more of my fear than I had to.
Tell me, boy, what do you know of fairies?
He asked, pacing around the foot of the table. I grunted in response. I'm willing to listen to a lecture or two. I figured the longer I kept on talking, the longer I'd stay alive. He smiled.
In Gaelic, we are the She. There are many of us, and we hold great power. We decide who prospers and who will fail. We decide who lives and dies.
I cut him off. And you're a she. What were you doing to that woman? Luckily for me, he seemed quite patient, despite my rude interjection.
She was a whore. Every now and then, it's important to remind people of their moral standards. It was punishment, mind you. We don't kill everyone that would sell his or her body for drugs and money. That raised too much suspicion. I've come to make you a deal. I've fancied the idea of taking up an apprentice. I cannot have children, you see, but I can make more like me. You live forever, and you'd have a purpose in life. Wealth, both material and immaterial.
He raised his hands irreverently toward the sky as he said the last. How did he know which of my strings to pluck? His offer sounded tempting. What's the catch? He prowled towards the middle of the table. He leaned over me, resting a hand on my shoulder, and grinned.